Good afternoon. A thought for you today on the topic of faith, wise faith and foolish faith. It comes to mind in the passage from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, verses 5 through 7. Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you. And on their hands they will bear you up, and so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." It's a wonderful passage about faith and our understanding of faith. Faith is that sense that we have that God will provide, that God's promise is true, that God will triumph in the end, and that God loves us. These are things for which we say we have faith in our God. Faith in our God is also something that says that we have the faith that God gives us that which we need. Not always that which we want, and not always the way in which we want it, but that which we need. And in the end, even at the end of life, that God is there and will welcome us and hold us and be with us always. But faith is an interesting thing that way when we say that God gives us that which we need. How do we use that which God has given us? How do we use those gifts of all kinds? Every kind of talent and gift of resource, of imagination, of mind, of body, of skill, of earthly treasure. These are things that God has given us to use wisely and well and in God's service. And part of that is that thought there of choices and wisdom, because God has given us a brain. And I think I'm reminded God gives us a brain and God expects us to use them. A number of years ago, many years ago now, I did have somebody say to me that they didn't need to wear a seatbelt because God would protect them, and if they died, God was simply calling them home. Which is one way of interpreting faith and God's providence, I suppose. But I wonder if that guy's guardian angel ever got a vacation. In the middle of a pandemic, then, how do we live out our faith? How do we look to God's providence? How do we choose some of the things that we choose to do? And I have been sometimes a bit amazed to read the accounts of some pastors in Christian faith that, particularly a few weeks ago, maybe less so now, but a few weeks ago, there was accounts of some of those different pastors insisting they were going to keep worshiping. They weren't going to stop. They were going to invite as many people as they could because God would protect them. God is greater than this virus. God will not allow them to be smitten because of their faith. And unfortunately, in a number of cases, some of those same pastors and their parishioners have become ill, and in a few, even more sadly, have died from this virus, from this disease. And as much as I can sort of admire the commitment and the fervor that they would have in faith to God, I also think that how can this be a wise decision? How can it be gospel? In light of things such as Matthew chapter 4, verse 7, again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test. If God has given you a good way to do something, use it. Don't pick the hardest way and expect God to save us from our own foolishness. But I think in terms of how we might live out in this pandemic, I think there's some other pastor that comes to mind in his words and his advice. Back in 1527, the bubonic plague was ravaging so much of Europe. And the sagas of that are so clear as to how many died. And the misery and the pain and the agony of those that were afflicted. And in that period of time, Martin Luther was commanded by the Elector of Germany, sort of the ruler of the area. He was to leave the city and move to the more rural area where it would be safer for him. And Luther refused. Him and Katharina decided instead that they would open their home to those that were afflicted with the plague. That they would make that a treatment place, a hospital of sorts for those that were already suffering When I ponder that and a little bit more of that detail, Luther did not say it was wrong to close shops and leave and isolate. He never judged that. For those, he said that was appropriate. He did say first, though, that we should consider our responsibility to the community and family. Here are Luther's comments on his own decision. Again, he did not judge others on that. He judged his own decision. His words: I shall ask God mercifully to protect us. Then I shall fumigate, help purify the air, administer medicine and take it. I shall avoid places and persons where my presence is not needed, in order not to become contaminated and thus perchance inflict and pollute others, and so cause their death as a result of my negligence. If God should wish to take me, he shall surely find me. And I have done what he has expected of me, and so I am not responsible for either my own death or the death of others. If my neighbor needs me, however, I shall not avoid place or person, but will go freely as stated above. So this is such a God-fearing faith, because it is neither brash nor foolhardy, and does not tempt God. So, my friends, in this time, I think we are called to stay faithful, trust in God, believe in God's promise, and serve God, serve our neighbor, all of our neighbors, as they are in need, but also to be smart, to be safe, to use those brains that God has given us so that we may serve God and neighbor as long as possible. This day and all, peace be with you.